What is going on, guys? Welcome back to your Lake Fork Guide. Another episode of the Guides Network. Today, I brought my man David Ozio to talk to you guys about fishing small swim baits in the fall transition to catch really big bass, especially on Lake Fork. Well, David, man, once again, let's shake your hand. I shake your hand enough. Let me shake it one more time. Thank you very much for joining us, as you always do. We're in the fall transition time, as we said in the brief intro there. And when you get fall transition, that starts moving some shad around, and they start to congregate in areas. And there's not a whole lot of things on this earth, that are easier to fish, more versatile in shallow cover, and mimic a shad better than these smaller size swim baits.
Yep, and this is my key bait right now. As you can see, I'll get it up here close. This is a Owner Flashy Swimmer with a 6-inch Divine 4.5 inch swim bait. And this color is Pro Shad. And the reason why I choose this color here, and a lot of these backs of these creeks, we haven't had any rain in quite a while, all right? So the water's gonna be a little bit clearer in the backs of those creeks, especially around vegetation, whether it be coontail grass, hyacinths, any kind of alligator weed, whatever the case, the water's gonna be clearer. So if that is the case, this bait has a little bit more of a translucent look to it, and even on sunny days, it works really, really well. Now, like Billy and I have shot some videos.
Just so we don't pass up the rig, that's a 5/0 hook.
Yes.
And a 4-inch Divine swim bait from 6 Sense Fishing, which you can buy at 6centfishing.com. And when you do, you use the code Your Lake Fork Guide. That'll save you 10%.
Right, and that's a 1/4 ounce weight on there. Right. And so you can turn them a little bit quicker in this 82, 86 degree water, in which we do. These are really search baits, and that's the key to locating lots of these big schools of baits, and then we can tweak on them after that. But fantastic search bait for this time of the year.
Maybe my favorite thing about these weedless swim baits in the fall transition is, fall transition means fish are moving.
Yes.
Which means you have to cover a lot of water. And with this rig right here, you rig it up on that hook, you kind of measure it out where the hook's gonna go in, right? You take your thumb, measure it, you stick the hook all the way through the bait, and then you just skin hook it back in the top side. Well, that right there, folks, if you just point your rod at it and reel, this comes through anything, and I mean anything. You're hard pressed to hang that up in anything you want to throw it through. So what that does is it allows you to get that trolling motor going like KVD down the bank, cover a ton of water, and whatever you encounter, be it a brush top, a flooded bush, flooded vegetation like alligator weed, palmweed, coontail, hydrilla, it doesn't matter. Throw it up under, it doesn't matter. You can cover all of it, and that's maybe my favorite thing about this bait. Yes, it looks like a shad. Yes, they start focusing on shad, but man, I can be super efficient and cover probably more water with this than I can anything else.
Well, and another beauty of this is too, especially going into this time of the year, and I've been for the last 2 weeks in the backs of creeks, and I've found shad in a lot of places.
They're piling up.
The interesting thing about it is that the bass haven't really got into the shad just yet. Water temps are still 85, 87, 88 degrees, and it's going to take a little bit lower water temp in order for, I think, for those fish to activate and start feeding up for the fall going into the winter season. And so I'm still continuing to look, and the interesting thing today, even we were on the water for a while trying to pull in some of these shad type bass, and there were shad flicking all over the place, but we just didn't get a lot of bites yet. Water temps are still a little bit high. So the other side of this, talking about this, is the beauty of this is search bait, and you're going down these weeded bank lines, and you end up striking one here, maybe get one 50 yards down the line, maybe another one here or there. What you can do is then after that, sun gets up a little higher, you can turn around and go back through those areas with more of a down bait, a Texas rig worm, maybe a 6 cents stick bait, clout, or anything in that area right there to go slower, and those fish will jump on that. Buys you a little extra time on that morning run.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an unbelievable bait. Talk to me about the gear you're throwing on. We know the hook's the 5/0 Owner Flash Swimmer. Well, I'll tell you what, before we do that, one thing that I wanted to add in there today when we're talking about swim baits is you know, like you were talking about, not a lot of bass in there yet. This is the early part. I think when we were fishing this morning, I looked at it and said, you know what we're fishing for right now? We're fishing for the few residential fish that live here all year and the very first movers, because not very many of them have pulled in yet.
Have moved in yet.
But guys, by the time you watch this video next week, and then a week after that, and a week after, it's coming.
Yep.
This is a bite that's coming to you. So start doing it now, get ahead of it, and watch those fish come to you. You catch more and more throughout the fall transition as we get closer to the peak fall bite. But one thing that happens also in that early move, a lot of the shad that come in there, it's the smaller shad. Even amongst threadfin shad, there's different sizes, right? Different classes, and the smallest ones tend to move in first in my experience. And I love this pattern, but a lot of times the one I'm gonna lean on is gonna be the even smaller, the 3.5 inch Divine swim bait, and I'm rigging that on a 3/0 owner flashy swimmer. Same deal, same exact rig, but it's just a downsized version to mimic those smaller bait fish.
And the beauty of that, I'll always have one of those tied on, always, along with this also. And when I'm in an area where there is a lot of shad like that, and I get one swing at mine but not hit it, not eat it, I'm gonna follow it up with that right there with a smaller one. And most of the time they'll hit it. Now I fish a lot of the stringer tournaments here on this lake, and there is times of the year when I'll start the day out with that smaller bait like that, and then we'll say 30, 45 minutes into the day, and I've got a limit, then I'm gonna roll over to something bigger. What I'm gonna catch with this is the slot fish a lot of times, but I'm also gonna catch the huge giant unders. And I'm talking the 250 to 3 pound class unders, and that's what this thing really does well.
And what's really crazy and fun about this technique is as these fish move in, it's not like they're all grouped up by size. Like sometimes in summer they kind of group by size and whatnot, but as these fish start to move around and mix up, you can go along and catch those smaller fish, get your limit, right? But even on the little one, guys, I can tell you, I've had customers myself caught overs on the little bitty one just kind of randomly as you're going down the bank. You can catch a random big fish on these, either one of these two swim baits.
And I'll tell you when I see that happening is in the fall, day 2, 3 days after a cold front.
Oh yeah.
And that's when that really shines. Yeah. You're gonna have to size down and in order to just to get the bites, but like he says, when that smaller bait is coming in front of their face, like you said, an over's possible, and I mean it is a bait they can't resist.
What about our gear? What we got with rod, reel, and line here?
I throw this a lot of times on I'm an Akuma guy, and I'll use a little bit shorter rod. I watch videos that y'all have run here in the past. Y'all are using a lot more heavier gear.
Okay.
This is a 6/8 medium heavy rod.
Wow, yeah.
It's a little bit shorter, 6/8, and it is a 10 to 20 line rated rod. The line rating is always on every rod right here, and it'll tell you exactly, you know, what this rod is. I mean, being a 10-20, it is a good in between, and a 6:3 to 1 gear ratio reel, and most of the time I'm going to be using either 15 pound mono, and because I want stretch. I don't lose as many fish on the stretch as I do on the lines that don't have as much stretch. I might have a tendency to break in shallow water, especially if they rub up against a stump or something like that. The fluorocarbon, unless you're using, what is it, a Brazex or
man, I'll tell you,
shooter.
I actually use the cheap stuff because being a fishing guy, we change line a bunch.
We do change line
and we keep it stretched a lot. So I use the Seaguar Red Label. What was kind of interesting, which I mean, this is fishing, we all do things a little different. Like you said, we are using bigger rods. The rod I use is a 7.4 medium heavy, but I'm using 20 pound fluorocarbon.
Right.
But that's kind of a general thing with me and you. I tend to overpower gear a lot more than you do.
And I'm more of a lighter line guy, and I mean, I want more bites. And over the years, I've literally learned that, you know, even when throwing 12 pound line, you're going to get more bites. But in this case, where you can catch an over, I'll rig up even 16 pound, and I'll use Sunline Sniper FX, the FX Sniper, which is a fantastic line. If you really study that line, the 16 pound diameter is almost of any normal 14 pound line. And so it's a little stronger, but it's a little thinner, and so I can get away with it. Okay. But when we're fishing in 2 foot of water, 3 foot of water, I mean, there's stumps around in the areas like that. Yeah, one could wrap up on a stump, but most of the time I don't have any problem with it. What I do though is retie after every 2 or 3 fish. And
good point.
That's a guarantee. I have to do that, especially using the fluorocarbon. I found over time using the monos, it's not nearly as a mandatory option, you know, as far as that goes. But I mean, doing this as long as we've done it, I mean, I've tried everything. I find that a lot of times I'll land more fish on the mono. In the dirtier water, you can get away with the mono, a 15-pound mono, a big game, hypothetically, and fish can't tell the difference in the dirtier water. Now, if it's real clear water, different story, I will use fluorocarbon.
Very good. As far as the area you fish, it's kind of interesting on this. I mean, I don't know what your thoughts on it are. My thoughts on it are on the bank, dang near anywhere when you are in the early fall transition, where they can pull up out of main lake structure and get on the main lake banks, the more main lake type banks, or they could be moving into the backs of the pockets already. You'll have some during the transition that are scattered all in between. And like we said earlier, that's what makes this bait so powerful, is you can cover all of that really efficiently. But as far as an area to go, basically it's just find you a bank line that looks good, hopefully that has some, you know, structure that held fish in the summer nearby it, where those fish can easily move onto that bank, and just go.
Yeah, and we recently fished a pocket that I hadn't been in quite a while, and it had the coontail grass growing way out into the pocket in 3 foot of water. Ooh, man, if you can find a spot like that, that's a home run, usually, especially early, because those bigger fish will set more out in the middle, not necessarily up on the bank, and the smaller ones will be towards the bank. And so when I'm fishing an unders tournament where I'm looking to get a limit quick, all the casts are going to be towards the bank where I know the little ones are. When you want the bigger bite, and you can catch a 6 or a 7 pound over out there in that 3.5, 4 foot of water, you know, right on the edge,
or
of
even
that
8 or 9
grass.
pound over.
Yeah.
I mean, I've had, even
grass.
on these little ones at times, like I said, I've had 8 and 9 pound overs get caught. But you're right, you do tend to catch where the grass spreads out and comes off the bank a little more, and you got that underwater vegetation. That does tend to be where you're going to catch your bigger fish.
Well, and two, today I was with Billy, and he's got a 360 on his boat, and god dog it was really neat to see where the grass was growing out to, and you could really focus every cast right on that edge. And fish are edge oriented. They always like to stay near an edge, whether it be up in the grass a little bit or out in a little bit open water. But if you run that edge a little bit in, a little bit out, most of the time you're going to get a lot more bites.
Yes, sir. Now, retrieve also, we'll show you guys how to retrieve it, but it's a great guide bait. It's a great bait for anybody's great beginner bait, but it's really good for experienced guys as well because it gets bit.
It's a chunk.
It's a super easy bait to fish. Jump up on the front deck real quick, David. Let's show them how we do this.
It's a chunk and wine bait.
Yeah, it's not much to it.
All right, guys. So the key to this is, with rolling this big swim bait like this, is you want to hold the rod tip low. You really want it close to the water. And look, watch my hand. I'm turning the reel handle, and I'm trying to feel everything that it touches. I'll slow it down till it touches something. If it bogs in it, I'm going to speed it up a little bit till it clears, and then I'm going to slow it back down. That erratic movement of it touching the grass, touching the vegetation, will trigger that fish to actually go after it. And so I see too many people a lot of times, and when they're in a situation, they'll hold the rod tip way up like this. That's going to make the bait ride high in the water column. You may be too far over the top of the grass. And it's like I said a while ago, is that there's places where there's 3.5, 4 foot deep grass on an edge. I want that fish, that bait, to be down 6 inches off the bottom, if not a foot off the bottom. And that's why you hold the rod tip low and then feel everything with the tip of the rod. I can't even stress how critical that is. And I've seen it with clients before in the boat, where more times than many, if I'm casting, I'm going to get more bites than them. I'll stop throwing and try to teach them that use the tip of the rod to see what it's touching. And once you get that art down, you are going to put more fish in the boat.
I want to step in here and throw one more tip in there. When you're fishing that thick vegetation, you know, David's been talking about fishing the edges. That's the prime spot to be. But if you want to get up in that grass and fish a little bit thicker vegetation, there's a way to get this bait through anything you want to bring it through. We'll go ahead and make our cast out there. And the deal is, you got to point the rod straight down the line where the line is coming directly out of the end of the rod, right? What David said about pointing down is great for getting it deeper. But sometimes when you put an angle on that rod where anytime that this rod has an angle on it and it can bend that rod tip like that, that's going to allow that vegetation or anything you're coming through to load up on the head of that bait. It's going to bind it up more. But when you point the line straight out of the rod and reel, it's going to apply direct pressure to the line, no bend in the rod, no shock absorption, and your line, that swim bait, is going to have direct pressure on it. It's going to bulldog through just about anything you ever want to reel it through. So if you find yourself getting bogged down in the vegetation while you're fishing this technique, be sure you point the rod straight at the line, where the line comes straight out the end of the rod, and that swim bait will bulldog right through there. And the cool part about that is what David's talking about, giving it that little deal. When you do that, it'll catch in that grass for a second and shoot out of there. It's almost like snatching a rattle trap or a chatterbait out of grass, and it gets those same reaction bites, and all you got to do is point down the line and reel. Awesome. Now Dave, as far as the hook set goes on a swim bait, it's got a big 5-aught, or even those 3-aught hooks have a pretty heavy gauge wire in it.
Yep. Yep.
When you get the bite, it's, to me, what I tell people, hold the bait up here real quick for me. This bait's rigged like a Texas rig. Like if you were rigging a weightless, any kind of Texas rig that you were text posing and skin hooking, when you set the hook on a Texas rig, you step back and lean on them.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, you kind of feel, once you get the bite, you kind of reel up the slack, feel for the fish, then you drill them. I do the same thing with this. When I get a bite with this, I kind of check them up, feel for them. I'll step back and I hammer down because I got that big hook. Is that similar for you?
Well, you got to be real careful with this. And Billy and I were talking about this earlier today. This rod absorbs a lot of the shock, and I'm not as strong as he is physically. All right. And we talked about this earlier with people breaking off on hook sets. All right. So
sometimes they do.
This rod is tinctured, word of the day, with the fact that
I have no idea what that means.
The way I swing on it, all right, it'll load up and the line doesn't put enough stretch on the line in order to break it. So the rod absorbs a lot of that. If you get too heavy a rod for this application and you've got some guns on you and you're using 16-pound fluorocarbon, you could break it off on a hook set if you stick 5, 6, 7, 8 pounder.
That's why it's important to have your line paired up with your rod correctly, as you were talking about earlier.
Exactly.
But like with me throwing 20-pound line, I just
and it
get
works.
after, yeah.
But I personally have over the years done better with lighter line.
Right.
I tend to get more bites. Now, the jury's out on 20-pound line moving the bait that fast. If it makes that big a difference, dirty water, I'll contend that. I mean, I'll concede that to the fact that
here's what I know.
That's probably okay.
He did get more bites than me today, so maybe there's something to this smaller line.
I did get more bites. I sure did. You know, and so the lighter line does have its place in life, you know, but you have to find the happy balance. And the people that go out with me on guide trips, I teach them this balance as far as what rods are, how to set the drag. The drag is the most important thing. Too many people will cinch up on that drag way too tight. You've got to have the drag really technically set at 1/3 the tensile strength of the line you're using. So with 15-pound line, 5 pounds of drag. I'll explain that some other day on
He's a lot smarter than me, folks.
How we come up with that.
He's a lot smarter than me. He's saying words I don't even know definitions for. Y'all might have to get your dictionary out to look at some of his. But hey, that's why we bring him on here, because the dude is super smart. David, thank you once again. Great job explaining the fall transition swim bait bite. We hope this helps you guys catch a whole bunch more fish. If you want to know some areas to go try these swim baits out in any of our lakes that we have, go to the Fish Life app, check out the lakes that we have. If any of those pertain to you, I guarantee you there'll be shallow areas during the fall transition and throughout fall where you can go try the swim bait bite, and it'll be just about as good a chance as you'll ever have to go catch some big bass. Check out the Fish Life app for the most current and precise information that's ever been offered in the world of bass fishing. It's linked in the description. Y'all give David Ozio a shout out in the comments. Thank you guys for watching as always. We'll see you next time right here
on your Lake Fork Guide.
We did get better. We did get better.